Have you ever felt like you were stuck in a loop, having the same arguments with the same people, making the same mistakes over and over again, and wondering why your relationships never seem to change no matter how hard you try? What if the answer wasn't about trying harder, but about understanding the invisible psychological games being played beneath every conversation, every conflict, every moment of connection? Today, we are diving deep into one of the most fascinating and transformative books ever written about human psychology, Games People Play: The Psychology of Human Relationships by Dr. Eric Berne. Published in 1964, this book became a cultural phenomenon and a foundational text in the field of transactional analysis. It sold millions of copies worldwide, was translated into dozens of languages, and it changed the way therapists, counselors, and ordinary people understood human behavior forever. This is not just a psychology book. This is a mirror, a clear, sometimes uncomfortable, often hilarious mirror held up to the way we actually interact with one another. And once you see your own reflection in it, you cannot unsee it. So, let us begin. Section 1. Who was Eric Berne? Eric Berne was born in Montreal, Canada in 1910. He trained as a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst and was deeply influenced by Sigmund Freud, but over time he began to develop his own radical framework for understanding human psychology. He rejected much of the abstract, inaccessible language of traditional psychoanalysis and instead created a system that was direct, practical, and above all, understandable to ordinary people. He called his framework Transactional Analysis, or TA. The core idea was simple but revolutionary. All human interactions, what he called transactions, can be analyzed and understood according to which ego state each person is operating from at any given moment. Berne worked as a therapist in San Francisco and developed his ideas through years of clinical observation. He noticed patterns, endlessly repeated patterns, in the way his patients related to each other and to the world. He began cataloging these patterns, naming them, and eventually realized that what he was observing were not just random behaviors, but structured, predictable psychological games. In 1964, he published Games People Play, and the world was never quite the same. Section 2. The 3 ego states: parent, adult, child. Before we can understand the games, we need to understand the foundation of Berne's entire system, the 3 ego states. Berne argued that at any given moment, a person can be in one of 3 distinct psychological states, which he called the parent, the adult, and the child. These are not metaphors. These are actual states of mind with distinct thoughts, feelings, and behavioral patterns that every human being shifts between constantly throughout their day. Let us look at each one carefully.
The parent ego state. The parent ego state is made up of recordings, mental and emotional recordings of everything we absorbed from our actual parents and authority figures during the first 5 or so years of life. When you are in your parent ego state, you're essentially replaying the behaviors, attitudes, values, and beliefs that were modeled for you by the significant adults in your early life. The parent state has 2 main modes. The first is the nurturing parent, which is warm, caring, and protective. When you comfort a friend who is crying or gently encourage someone who is struggling, you are operating from your nurturing parent. The second mode is the critical parent, which judges, criticizes, sets rules, and sometimes shames. When you wag your finger at someone or tell them they should do something or feel contempt for what someone else is doing, that is your critical parent speaking. The key thing to understand about the parent state is that it operates automatically. It is largely unconscious. You are not choosing these responses. You are simply replaying what was programmed into you. The adult ego state. The adult ego state is the part of you that thinks rationally, gathers data, processes information, and makes decisions based on logic and evidence rather than old programming or emotional reactions. When you are in your adult state, you are fully present in the current moment, assessing the actual reality in front of you. The adult is not cold or robotic. It is simply grounded. It is the part of you that can say, "Let me think about this clearly. What are the facts here? what is the most effective response? Berne believed that psychological health largely came down to strengthening the adult ego state, developing the capacity to observe your own parent and child states and to choose how to respond rather than simply react. The child ego state. The child ego state contains all the feelings, impulses, and ways of experiencing the world that you had as an actual child. Just like the parent, it has two main modes. The natural child is spontaneous, curious, playful, and emotionally authentic. It is the part of you that laughs until it hurts, that falls in love, that experiences genuine wonder and delight. This is the most creative and energetic part of your personality. The adapted child, on the other hand, is the part of you that learned to modify its natural impulses in response to parental demands and social expectations. When you feel anxious about being judged, or when you rebel against authority, or when you comply with something you do not actually want to do just to keep the peace, that is your adapted child at work. The child ego state is not inferior to the adult or the parent. Berne was clear that a healthy personality draws on all three states at appropriate times. The problem arises when we are stuck in one state, or when our states are in conflict with the states of the people around us.
Section 3. Transactions, the basic unit of human interaction. Now that we understand the three ego states, we can understand what Berne meant by transactions. A transaction is simply any unit of social interaction, any stimulus and response between two people. When you say good morning and someone says good morning back, that is a transaction. When you complain about your boss and your friend sympathizes, that is a transaction. When you criticize someone and they apologize, that is a transaction. Every transaction involves ego states on both sides, and Berne classified them into three types. Complementary transactions. A complementary transaction is one where the response comes from the ego state that was addressed. For example, if you speak from your adult state to someone else's adult state, say asking a practical question and getting a practical answer, that is a complementary transaction. Complementary transactions can continue indefinitely. Communication flows smoothly. They can also be complementary in less healthy ways. If you speak from your critical parent to someone's child state, say you criticize them and they apologetically comply, that too is complementary, even though it is not particularly healthy. The point is that the transaction is completed as expected. Crossed transactions. A crossed transaction is where the response comes from an unexpected ego state or is directed at an unexpected ego state. Crossed transactions cause breakdowns in communication, arguments, hurt feelings, disconnection. For example, if one person asks a reasonable adult-to-adult question, "Do you know where my keys are?" and the other person responds from their critical parent, "You always lose your keys. You are so disorganized." The transaction has been crossed. What was intended as a simple information request has suddenly become an emotional confrontation. Ulterior transactions. Ulterior transactions are the most psychologically complex and the most important for understanding Berne's games. In an ulterior transaction, there are two levels of communication happening simultaneously: the social level, what is being said on the surface, and the psychological level, what is really being communicated underneath. For example, a salesman might say to a customer, "This is our top-of-the-line model. It is probably a bit too expensive for most people." On the surface, this is an adult-to-adult informational statement, but on the psychological level, the salesman is actually activating the customer's child ego state, specifically the part of the child that does not want to feel most people. The customer's child hears, "I dare you to prove you can afford this," and the customer buys the car. Ulterior transactions are the building blocks of psychological games. Section 4. Strokes, the hunger at the heart of it all. Here is one of Berne's most profound insights, one that I think explains more about human behavior than almost anything else I have ever encountered. Berne argued that human beings have a fundamental biological and psychological need for what he called strokes. A stroke is any unit of recognition, any acknowledgement that you exist. In the most literal sense, an infant needs physical touch, actual strokes to survive and develop. Studies of children raised without physical affection, even if their other needs are met, show devastating consequences for their psychological and physical development. But as we grow up, we learn to substitute other forms of recognition for physical touch. A compliment is a stroke. A smile is a stroke. Someone remembering your name is a stroke. Being criticized is a stroke. Even being ignored, which Berne called a negative stroke, is better than no stroke at all, because at least you are being registered as existing. This is one of the most important things in the entire book, so let me say it again clearly. In the economy of human psychology, a negative stroke, being criticized, blamed, or even attacked, is preferable to no stroke at all. This is why people stay in abusive relationships. This is why children who are ignored act out. This is why some people unconsciously provoke conflict, because conflict, at least, is a form of recognition. Berne described 3 forms of time structuring that human beings use to get strokes: withdrawal, being alone with your thoughts; rituals, scripted exchanges like, "How are you? Fine, thanks." Pastimes, casual conversation about safe topics; activities, getting things done together; intimacy, genuine, open, unguarded connection; and games. Games, Berne argued, are a compromise, a way of getting strokes without risking the vulnerability of genuine intimacy. And this is why people play them, not because they are bad people, not because they are trying to hurt anyone, but because games are a structured, predictable way to get the human contact we all desperately need, while keeping our deeper selves protected.
Section 5. What is a psychological game? Now we arrive at the heart of the book. Berne defined a psychological game as a recurring set of transactions, often repetitive, superficially plausible, with a concealed motivation, or more colloquially, a series of moves with a snare or a gimmick. In simpler terms, a game is a pattern of interaction that has a hidden agenda, ends in a predictable payoff of bad feelings, and gets repeated again and again throughout a person's life. Every game has 6 features that Berne outlined in what he called the game formula: a con, a gimmick, a response, a switch, a cross-up, and a payoff. The con is the opening move, the bait. It might be a helpless request, a provocation, a seemingly innocent question, or a vulnerable disclosure. The person playing the game puts something on the table. The gimmick is the psychological weakness in the other person that the con hooks into. If someone is playing the game of "ain't it awful," complaining endlessly about their problems, the gimmick they are looking for is your sympathy, your advice, or your rescuing instinct. Not everyone gets hooked by the same gimmick. The response is what the hooked person does. They offer the sympathy, or they give the advice, or they try to rescue. The switch is the dramatic twist. Suddenly, the game changes direction. The person who is complaining becomes defensive. The person who is asking for help rejects the help they are given. The person who seemed vulnerable suddenly turns accusatory. The cross-up is the moment of confusion, the "wait, what just happened" feeling that leaves both parties momentarily disoriented. And then comes the payoff, the emotional dividend that both players collect. For the person who initiated the game, the payoff is usually a negative feeling that confirms their life script, their deep, unconscious story about themselves and the world. For the other person, there is also a payoff, usually feelings of guilt, resentment, confusion, or self-righteous anger, all of which confirm their own script. This is crucial. Both players get something out of the game. That is why games are played. That is why they are so hard to stop. Section 6. The major games Berne described. Berne cataloged dozens of games in the book, organized by the social context in which they typically occur: life games, marital games, party games, sexual games, underworld games, consulting room games, and good games. Let us explore the most significant ones. Game, If It Weren't For You. This is one of the most common marital games and one of the easiest to understand. The basic pattern works like this. A woman complains, "I could have been a great dancer, but my husband won't let me take classes." The surface transaction looks like a grievance. She's blaming her husband for her unfulfilled potential. But here's the deeper psychological reality that Berne uncovered. People who play this game typically choose partners who will indeed restrict them because they actually want to be restricted. Why? Because restriction provides an excuse. If she cannot dance, she never has to risk trying and failing. Her husband's prohibitions protect her from her own fear of inadequacy. The payoff for her is that she gets to feel like a victim without having to confront her own anxiety. The payoff for the husband is that he gets to feel powerful and necessary. Both players are getting something, but neither is getting what they actually need. When the game ends, if her husband stops restricting her or she leaves him, she often finds herself unable to take the dance classes anyway, because the real obstacle was never her husband, it was always her. Game, why don't you, yes but? This is perhaps the most intellectually elegant game in the book, and it's also one of the most universal. You've definitely played it or had it played on you. The pattern, person A presents a problem. Person B offers a solution. Person A says yes but. Person B offers another solution. Yes but. Another solution. Yes but. This can continue for an extraordinary length of time, with person B running out of suggestions before person A runs out of objections. What makes this a game rather than a genuine problem-solving conversation is the fact that person A is not actually looking for solutions. If they were, they would have accepted one of them. What they are actually doing is demonstrating to themselves and to their audience that no one can help them, that their situation is hopeless, and that they are special in their insolubility. The payoff for person A is the triumphant feeling of having stumped everyone. The payoff for the eventual losers, the advice givers, is sometimes resentment, I was only trying to help, or sometimes guilt, I must not have suggested the right thing. Berne pointed out that this game is almost always played in groups, not one-on-one. It's essentially a performance, and crucially, if someone actually solves the problem, if they give a suggestion that person A cannot easily dismiss, the game ends, and person A becomes noticeably uncomfortable, because solving the problem was never the point. Game, kick me. This game is played by people who seem to have a gift for inviting harsh treatment. They make social blunders that provoke rejection. They confide their vulnerabilities to exactly the wrong people. They loan money to those who will not pay it back. They take jobs they are likely to fail at. And then, when the predictable consequence arrives, the rejection, the betrayal, the failure, their internal response is something like, "There they go again. Why does this always happen to me?" The gimmick in this game is the player's own behavior that is unconsciously designed to invite a kick. The payoff is the confirmation of a deeply held belief. I am a person who gets picked. This is what the world does to me. Berne was compassionate about this game. He didn't blame the player. He understood that this pattern usually originated in childhood, where being kicked may have been the primary form of parental attention available. The child learned misbehave, get noticed. As an adult, the same pattern plays out, but now they don't even notice they're inviting it. Game, now I've got you, you son of a bitch. Berne gave this game an unforgettable name for a reason. The pattern, someone is waiting, sometimes years, for the other person to make a mistake. And when the mistake finally comes, the response is wildly disproportionate to the actual offense.
A husband who has been quietly simmering with resentment about his wife's spending finally discovers she overdrew the account by $20. Suddenly, all that stored-up anger comes pouring out in a tremendous explosion. He was not actually angry about $20. He had been collecting grievances for months, and this was simply the moment the dam broke. The payoff is the justified expression of anger that the player has been holding back, righteousness without guilt. The mistake of the other person provides moral permission to unleash stored resentment. Game, I'm only trying to help you. This game is particularly common among professionals in helping roles, doctors, therapists, social workers, teachers, but it is also played in personal relationships constantly. The game begins with one person offering to help another. The helper puts in genuine effort. The recipient either fails to improve, rejects the help, or blames the helper when things do not work out. At this point, the helper's response, if they are playing the game, is self-righteous injury. After everything I've done for you, I was only trying to help. The payoff is this feeling of martyrdom, the sense of being unappreciated, of having given their best. What it reveals, however, is that the helping was never entirely altruistic. It contained a hidden expectation of gratitude, improvement, or dependency. True helping, Berne suggested, comes from the adult state. It is offered without attachment to the outcome and without resentment when the person does not respond as hoped. Game, alcoholic. Berne analyzed the social dynamics around alcoholism in a way that was groundbreaking for its time and remains deeply insightful today. He described alcoholic not as a character, but as a game, one that involves multiple players beyond the drinker themselves. The central player is the alcoholic, but the game requires supporting characters: the persecutor, often a spouse who criticizes and moralizes; the rescuer, the well-meaning friend or counselor who tries to save them; the patsy, who provides money, excuses, and practical help; and the connection, who supplies the alcohol. Each player is getting something from the game. The persecutor gets to be righteous, the rescuer gets to feel noble, the patsy gets to feel needed, and the alcoholic, in addition to the physiological relief of the substance, collects a rich harvest of feelings: guilt, self-pity, defiance, and sometimes the perverse pleasure of defeating the rescuer. Berne was ahead of his time in recognizing that addiction exists within a social system, not just inside a single individual. Game, rapo. This is one of the sexual games Berne described, a manipulation in which one person offers sexual or romantic interest as bait and then withdraws it sharply once the other person responds. The withdrawal is often accompanied by moral indignation. "How dare you think I meant that?" The payoff varies depending on the degree of the game. At mild levels, it might simply be the pleasure of feeling attractive and powerful. At more severe levels, it can involve setting someone up for genuine humiliation, legal consequences, or emotional devastation. Game, schlemiel. A schlemiel is a Yiddish word for a clumsy, accident-prone person. In Berne's game, the schlemiel repeatedly makes messes, spills drinks, breaks things, causes social embarrassments, and then apologizes profusely and sincerely. The implicit expectation is that the apology will be accepted. The payoff for the schlemiel is the freedom to be destructive while maintaining a reputation for good intentions. The payoff for the other player, the victim of the messes, is righteousness if they eventually explode with anger. If they accept the apology without complaint, they have been caught in the game. The game is exposed when someone responds to the mess not by accepting the apology, but by saying something like, "I don't care about the apology, I just want you to stop spilling things." This denies the schlemiel their payoff and typically causes considerable discomfort. Game, wooden leg. What do you expect of someone with a wooden leg? This game involves using a real or imagined disability, physical, psychological, social, historical, as a justification for not taking responsibility or not trying. The game does not require that the disability be fake, it only requires that the disability be used as a permanent excuse. The payoff is exemption from the ordinary demands of life. The game is particularly insidious because challenging it can feel cruel. Are you saying my disability doesn't matter? When in fact, the challenge is not about the disability, but about the use being made of it.
Game corner. In this game, someone maneuvers another person into a situation where any response is wrong. If the person does A, they are wrong. If they do B, they are also wrong. The player of corner has set up a double bind, and their payoff comes from the other person's helpless frustration. Section 7. Life Scripts, the deeper architecture. Underlying all the games, Berne introduced the concept of the life script, one of his most profound and far-reaching ideas. A life script is the unconscious life plan that a person develops in early childhood, largely before the age of 7. Based on early experiences, messages from parents, both verbal and nonverbal, and the child's own interpretations of those experiences, every person essentially writes a story about who they are, what the world is like, what other people are like, and how their life will go. Common script themes include, "I will never be good enough," "I must not trust anyone," "I am fundamentally unlovable," "I must take care of everyone else," "I will always end up alone." Or more positively, "The world is basically safe," "I am capable of handling whatever comes," "I am worthy of love." Scripts have a beginning, middle, and end. In fact, Berne suggested that many people unconsciously know how their story will end and spend their lives playing it out. Someone with a tragedy script might make a series of decisions that, viewed from the outside, seem inexplicably self-destructive, but which are entirely consistent with bringing about the tragic ending the script demands. Scripts are reinforced by the games we play. If my script says I am unlovable, I will play games that collect evidence for this belief. I will choose partners who eventually leave me. I will behave in ways that push people away. I will interpret neutral events as rejection. Every negative payoff from every game becomes another entry in the evidence file for my script. And this is why simply deciding to change is often not enough. The script runs deep. It runs in the unconscious. It runs in the body. It runs in the automatic patterns of relationship and perception that feel like just the way I am. Berne identified 4 basic life positions that underlie most scripts. I'm okay, you're okay. This is the healthy position. The person believes that both they and others have worth and dignity. They can engage with others as equals. I'm okay, you're not okay. This is the position of the bully, the paranoid, the one who always blames others. The problem is everyone else. I'm not okay, you're okay. This is the position of depression and inferiority. Everyone else is fine. I am the problem. I'm not okay, you're not okay. This is the most hopeless position. The person believes that neither they nor anyone else has real worth. This is the position of profound despair. Berne believed that the ultimate goal of therapy and of personal development more broadly was to move people toward and sustain the I'm okay, you're okay position, not as a naive affirmation, but as a genuine, grounded orientation towards self and others. Section 8. Beyond Games: Intimacy and Authentic Living. If games are a way of getting strokes while avoiding vulnerability, then the opposite of games, the highest form of human connection Berne described, is intimacy. Berne defined intimacy as game-free engagement, a direct, unguarded, spontaneous exchange between two people with no hidden agendas, no scripts being played out, no roles being performed. It is two adult-to-adult or child-to-child human beings simply meeting each other as they are. Intimacy, Berne acknowledged, is rare, and it is rare for a reason. It requires genuine vulnerability. It requires the willingness to be seen, and the risk that being seen means being rejected. It requires the capacity to engage without knowing in advance how the interaction will go, without the safety net of a script or a game to fall back on. And this is why most people spend most of their time in the intermediate zones, rituals, pastimes, activities, and games, rather than in genuine intimacy. Not because they do not want intimacy, but because the risk feels too great. But here is Berne's message of hope. It is possible to interrupt the games. It is possible to recognize your own patterns, to see the gimmick being offered, to choose not to take the bait. And it is possible, slowly and with real effort, to build the capacity for more genuine, more vulnerable, more alive connection with other human beings. Section 9. The Legacy and Lasting Relevance of Berne's Work. When Game People Play was published in 1964, it immediately captured the cultural imagination. It reached the bestseller lists, was read by millions of non-specialists, and spawned an enormous industry of popular psychology books, workshops, and therapeutic approaches. Its influence is visible everywhere in modern psychology and popular culture. The concepts of the inner child, of dysfunctional relationship patterns, of unconscious scripts, all have roots in Berne's work. The codependency literature of the 1980s, the attachment theory movement, emotionally focused therapy, schema therapy, all have significant overlap with ideas Berne was developing in the early 1960s. But beyond its academic influence, Game People Play has remained beloved for a simpler reason. It explains real life in a way that actually makes sense. Most of us have had the experience of being caught in a relationship pattern we cannot seem to escape. Most of us have played "Why don't you? Yes, but."
Most of us have been a rescuer or a victim or a persecutor. Most of us have felt the hollow payoff of a game, the moment you win the argument but feel worse than ever, or when you get the apology but nothing has really changed. Berne's framework gives us language for these experiences, and with language comes the possibility of choice.
Section 10. How to stop playing games. The book does not just diagnose, it also points toward healing. So how do you actually stop playing games? Step 1. Awareness. The first and most fundamental step is awareness. You cannot change what you cannot see. Berne's taxonomy of games is essentially a catalog of patterns to look for. When you find yourself in the same situation again, when the same feeling shows up at the end of an interaction, when a particular person consistently brings out a certain pattern in you, that is a signal. A game may be in play. The question to ask is, what is the payoff here? What feeling am I collecting? And does that feeling confirm a story I already believe about myself or about the world? Step 2. Strengthening the adult ego state. The adult ego state is the observer, the rational processor, the part of you that can notice, I am feeling triggered right now, my child is scared, or my parent is judging. What is actually happening here? What do I actually need? What would be the most constructive response? Developing this capacity is the work of therapy, of meditation, of any practice that builds self-awareness and the ability to pause between stimulus and response. Step 3. Recognizing script beliefs. This is deeper work, identifying the life script that is being served by the games you play. What does your script tell you about yourself? What does it predict will happen to you? What is the ending it is steering you toward? This work often benefits from professional support, from a therapist trained in transactional analysis or related approaches. But even reading Berne's descriptions of the life positions and sitting with the question, which of these feels most like me, can be enormously illuminating. Step 4. Changing the transactions. Once you can see a game in progress, you have the option of declining to play. This does not mean withdrawing from the person. It means refusing to respond from the ego state their opening move expects. If someone makes a yes but opening, instead of offering solutions, which is what the game requires, you might simply reflect back, it sounds like you've really thought about this a lot. What do you think you'd like to do? This moves the transaction to adult and denies the game its fuel. This is uncomfortable at first. Games have a powerful momentum. When you refuse to play, the other person will often escalate, try harder to hook you, become confused, become angry. But over time, consistently declining to play changes the relational field. Step 5. Cultivating genuine intimacy. The ultimate goal is not just the absence of games, but the presence of something better. Genuine, vulnerable, adult and natural child connection with others. This requires building the capacity to tolerate uncertainty, to be seen, to give and receive care without a script or a hidden agenda. This is the work of a lifetime, but Berne believed, and I believe, that it is the work most worth doing. Conclusion. Games People Play is not a comfortable book. It asks you to look honestly at yourself, at the ways you have been manipulating others, inviting pain, avoiding intimacy, and repeating the same self-defeating patterns decade after decade. That is a confronting thing to sit with. But it is also an enormously compassionate book. Berne understood that people play games not because they are bad, but because they are human, because they are trying to survive, because they are working with the tools they were given, the scripts written before they could even read, the ego states shaped by parents who were themselves just trying to survive, the stroke hunger that is as fundamental as the hunger for food. The invitation of this book is not self-criticism, it is self-knowledge. And from self-knowledge comes the possibility of choice. And from choice comes the possibility of change. And from change comes the possibility, that rarest, most precious thing, of genuine human connection. So the next time you find yourself in a familiar argument, a repeating conflict, a situation that feels uncannily like something you've been through before, pause. Ask yourself, what game is being played here? What is my role? What is the payoff I am really after? And what would it look like to step out of the game and simply be present, real, open, and free? That question, more than any answer I could give you, is the gift of Eric Berne's extraordinary work. Thank you for watching. If this summary has given you something to think about, please share it with someone who might need it. And if you want to go deeper,
Read the book. It will change the way you see yourself and the people in your life forever.